I have a couple new updates for the game I'd like to share. The first is I have 2 new models for the game. These models have several animations. They can swap between idle animations, running animations, and spellcasting animations. I've also updated the method I use to move rendered animations from Blender into my game. Originally, I had been using Python scripts to stitch together the rendered animation frames into a big sprite sheet. I would then load this sprite sheet into the game. I would specify the number of frames and the size of the frames in the code for all the animations on the sprite sheet. This process was a little bit annoying as I had to specify this information for every single animation in the game. I realized I could skip this process if I put all the frames of an animation into a folder as separate images. I would then load all the images individually and stitch them together in the game into one big sprite sheet. This allowed the game to figure out the number of frames in each animation, as each image corresponded to a frame. I would then use a Python script to trim the white space from the frames as well as ensure that the frames were the same height and width. The game could then figure out the dimensions of the animation frames based off of the dimensions of a single image in the folder. The downside is that animations are a little bit slower to load as multiple images need to be loaded and then stitched together. This should not matter in the end, as I plan to create an asset pack that would have the animations already stitched together along with the frame information recorded. I got this idea from looking at the asset files from an old game called Dink Smallwood. I noticed that the images were not in a sprite sheet and were stored as clusters of images in folders. I then realized that this organization method would allow one to calculate certain animation info when loading an animation. I also re-added the ability to move from room to room, which I had broke at some point. I've also spent a decent amount of time battling this bug where my tiles are flickering when my game is full screen. I've not been able to completely eliminate it yet, but in the process I did upgrade my shaders to use view and projection matrices. For my last update, I've revamped my rendering engine and have started batching together my Opengl draw calls. Originally, every quad in the game was a separate draw call. However, now draw calls will be grouped together if possible. Every quad in the game is sorted by depth before drawing. This is so that the game can have proper alpha blending. Aside from GUI elements and certain tile layers, an object's depth is usually determined by its Y value. After all the necessary draw calls that need to be made during a frame have been sorted, the game will add draw calls that have the same texture and the same shader into a buffer so that they can be drawn at the same time. This means that all the tiles that are on a single layer will probably be drawn in a single draw call. This will drastically decrease the number of draw calls I need to make and speed up my rendering. That's all the updates I have for this devlog. Thanks for watching.